Hello, welcome to my first tutorial. First of many, I hope. I'm going to put an apology out right now. This is the first time I've done filming like this, so my camera's Jimmy wigged, kind of Mickey Moused here on a stack of books and wedged in with a paintbrush. I'll be taking a picture of the ridiculous layout I have going on here. And I'm new to filming and all this, so I definitely will have room for editing, but we're just gonna go with what we got here because I want to make sure I'm still giving you guys instruction while we are doing self-isolation. So we're gonna start off with a little bit of review because several people asked me if I could do a video on hatching and cross hatching. Nobody offered up stippling, but I'm going to include that as well. I know some of you never want to do stippling ever in your life, but it's an important skill to know. So we're going to be doing it. Okay, today what I have, sketchbook. Same book we have in class. If you have my class, just the 9x12, but you can use whatever you have at home. Line paper, computer paper, scraps of paper, back of homework. I do not care, especially because this is practice. I'm trying to use materials I know you guys will have at home. I'm not going to bust out any of my fancy stuff. So today I plan on just using my pencil. And I have my pins out just in case because a lot of times with the hatching, cross hatching, and stippling, it's fun to work with pen. And so I just have my good old ballpoint pen here, which I did not check to see if it was working. No, working pretty well. And I have a felt tip, couple felt tip sizes because we do tend to work with Sharpies in classes. I know some of you have that, but if you don't, no worries. Okay, let's start it off here, guys. Real quick as part of our review, if you have me, you remember what I talk about a lot, but if you don't, think about how you set up the mechanics of whatever art you're gonna do. How are you sitting? How is your material positioned? How are you holding the tool that you're using? It makes such a huge difference just to be aware of these things. So for instance, holding your pencil in this case, or any of the tools that you plan on using, will make such a difference on the control you have. So be aware of that. You know, choking up on something like this real tight, you know, just having that hand cemented onto your paper. You think you have control that way, but it's going to give you shaky, dark lines that are very hard to erase. You know, loosen it up a bit. Hold, I'd say, kind of midway. Also be like real fluid. Be ready to make some beautiful organic lines, have that natural line happen. It's just so much prettier. It's gonna help you develop your technique a bit more, and it gives you a bit more control. If you want to go real light, remember, want to go almost to the stem or to the eraser part of your pencil. It's a little less control, but your lines are a lot lighter, which will make them a lot easier to erase, or the shading to erase should you make a mistake, which we're all still practicing. That's going to happen. So just be aware of that as we continue this journey. Okay, so starting off, value, kind of talking about our four big ways we approach value. The first, of course, is blending. And this is what everybody go to no matter what tool you're using and that is just, you know, filling in a space. So sort of that back and forth shading or filling in that space. Hopefully you're going and working with your pressure to get darks and mids and light tones, loosening up, etc., etc. One technique I have for this that I go over in class, but you might need a reminder, is rather than doing that back and forth, which gets some nice quality, you still are going to have some gaps there with some paper showing through. I like to use ellipticals. So if I'm just doing a section that I need to fill in, I like to use a circular elliptical shape. What it does is it fills in the space a lot faster. It gives you a little bit more control, and it's a nice, just sort of smoother fill in. It's not so jagged, and it's just a little bit easier to correct. So I like doing that. You can still come in. It's a little harder to work with pressure in terms of adjusting your value, so layer. I cannot emphasize how important layering work is. It's time consuming, but we know good art is time consuming. Taking that time to work back in these layers just gives you so much more control as an artist. So I highly recommend you guys working in layers. It's not one and done. It's building up that process and really putting in that time. So just working more layers, going dark, kind of reworking those sections at the top to get them darker and working less on those bottom sections, and you're still gonna have that beautiful gradient. Okay, so that's blending. And most of you guys do that already, so you shouldn't need too much more instruction than that. Okay, let's talk about the big question, hatching. Hatching we use quite a bit. Remember, basic mechanics of hatching is you are creating lines that are going in the same directions. They don't ever intersect or intercross. Why we use hatching? It's a little bit faster and quicker in terms of if you're trying to do something like a gesture drawing or an observational drawing and you just want to show like the block shading or what have you, it's a nice way to use. The only other reason we use it quite a bit is textures. It's a nice way to create some beautiful textures if you're working with something that is not just smooth. So we'll use it then. Remember, the thing about hatching, guys, is your lines don't always have to be perfectly straight. You can bend them. You can contour. Remember that word contour means following the shape. And we'll look at that here in a minute. But in terms of how do we start, all of our value is that value scale. So remember with hatching, the principle is layering as well, but the more lines you have, obviously the darker you're going to be. And then as you break up those lines and have more paper showing through, the lighter it's going to get. So that I think is a big frustration with people is how do I get value with hatching? You've got to really work on taking your time and sort of looking at it and going, okay, how do I get like those midtones? Layer, come back in, rework some sections. Remember, as long as it's not intersecting, you're still hatching. So the less paper, the more layers you have, the more condensed hatching you have, that's where you're going to get those dark shades. As you break them apart and you have less layers, more paper coming through, you're going to have those midtones. So important, those midtones. And then, of course, as they really break apart and you have mostly paper, you're going to get your light tints. So that's how you create value using hatching. Start off doing that. Start off just doing a couple of value scales. You know, if you want to come in with your pen as well, same thing. You know, it's all about control. Learn how you have control. Start off with layers. Especially with pen, you're going to layer more. Condense those lines down. Come back in, rework your layers a little bit. Have that paper break away. And it's just going to keep getting those midtones, and then you'll get really dark. And trying to keep, you know, it steady with the shape of your line, etc. Okay? All right, let's talk about shapes. So if you are working, let's just start off with our good old-fashioned circle, right? Because that is sort of our go-to shape that we always practice things with. Like I said, this is review. So get a circle, best of your ability on there. Remember, contour. So if we just shaded this with those back and forth lines, we could show value. We could emphasize a light source just by showing where our light side is. But of course, this makes it really flat. We just spent time making a beautiful shape and now we flatten it out. So don't use just that flat line. Use the contour. So the contour is the shape, following the shape, creating a line that's going to follow that shape. So like I said, you can bend your line a little bit. So I'm pretending that my light source is coming in from the right hand side. So I'm going to use that right hand area a little bit lighter. And I'm still doing hatching. I'm not blending this. I'm going to leave these lines pretty raw, but I'm curving them. And then as it shifts, I'm going to shift directions here as well. Right? So I just started off with a very simple layer, and I'm just going to take my time and come back in and work these layers with that hatching. Go a little bit darker, really create a nice, beautiful edge that doesn't flatten out the shape. It emphasizes the shadow. Okay? And then, of course, if we were working with a shadow, like it's sitting on a flat surface, we would then use that flat line. Same principle though. Keep it dark and tight in your darker areas where it's sitting below your object, and then break them apart as you move away. Okay? All right, so there's hatching. Let's talk about cross hatching. It's another great tool to use. Cross hatching, of course, is the same thing, but now your hatch lines are crossing. It's very simplistic. Same thing, start off with that value scale where they're gonna get real condensed. They're gonna really create this dark pattern. It's because there's no paper showing through, and it's just a lot of lines happening. Then as you break it up, more of that paper is gonna show through, and you're gonna get midtones, and then of course you're back half of that where you're gonna have a lot of paper showing through, and then you have your light tones, your tints. Same thing, you can bend those lines. Okay, they're cross hatching, so if you're gonna be drawing something circular, draw them. So I'm gonna switch just to show you guys the difference here. I'm gonna go ahead and go with my larger felt tip. And for this one, I'm gonna go ahead and draw a cylinder. So you guys remember that. You're gonna just start off with that elliptical, give it some round, straight sides, and then round out that bottom. I'm obviously going straight pin, so that's a little rough, that's okay. So just like my circle there, you want to bend those lines, contour. So in this case, it's an elliptical. It'd be a cup or a tube of some sort. So think about what that would look like in terms of your lines. So I'm hugging. I like to think of it, I'm hugging the lines that I've already established with the shape I established. Okay, build up layers, especially with something like a felt pin. Not a lot of control, obviously not a lot of ways I can erase. So then I'm going to come back in with my cross hatching lines, and again I'm following that shape. I'm shifting it as the cylinder would shift. Okay, keeping that nice little highlight on the edge. I like to come in on my edges and emphasize the texture or shading technique I'm using, just so it doesn't disappear altogether. Okay, and then I can come over here and get really dark if I wanted to. Remember with cylinders, it's the opposite in terms of the inside. Think about how light would bounce in and out. And so the opposite would happen in terms of my shading. And I'm still using my cross hatching to emphasize it. Okay. And then that shadow to flatten it out a little bit because it's sitting on a surface. But again, I'm just using that. Cross hatching is just if you want a little bit more texture happening. If you're especially working with something trying to emphasize a texture, a little bit rougher texture. But yeah, contour, guys, that's a huge step. So here are my suggestions for practicing hatching, cross hatching, and stippling, which I'm going to show you here in a sec. Start with those value scales. So easy to do. You can create your boxes if you want to go old school, not old school, just beginner stuff here. I still do it all the time, especially if I have new materials. And so do that, or just do it, loosey-goosey like this. But that's a great way to get your control. Start off with that control bit, and then just play around with these basic shapes, Then look around for stuff at your house. Look for an apple or a rock even, and draw it, and use these different techniques. Stippling, of course, I'm going to be a little bit of a cheater here and go for the pin, since it's a little bit easier to see, a little bit faster to use. So of course, stippling, same principle as our dots. I know most of you hate it because it just takes a little bit more time, a lot of patience. But again, it's the same principle. You're gonna just condense your layers up and then break them apart to get more of your value. But stippling is beautiful. Some of you have used stippling. I'm gonna give a shout out there to Brittany Bustamante, just did in my AP class an entire background with stippling because she was trying to get the texture of dirt, and it is beautiful. It took her, if she's still working on it, a long time because it's an act of patience for sure, but it just elevated her work. She was doing a scene in the grass, and the dirt is the background, and it's just beautiful. It really pays off that time. So just the same thing, just work on getting your midtones. Oops, wrong end. how much paper shows through. You don't have to worry as much about the contour because they're dots, so they don't have really a shape themselves. But again, if you do something like a box, let's go with our good old-fashioned box here, guys. Okay. So again, pretending my light's coming in here from the right-hand side. So this would be our darkest. But it has this really cool, almost out of focus look, but it just is really nice. So if you take your time, we've got time on our hands right now, ladies and gentlemen. So this would be a wonderful time to practice some stippling. It's just got a beautiful quality to it. So don't knock it just because it's time consuming. Especially right now, we're working on our patience. This is a great exercise in patience, right? So I'm gonna say as we get to the corners here, it's gonna be a little bit darker and a little bit lighter here. And then even on the edges, like I said, I like to emphasize what technique I'm using. So I'd create that. And then for our shadow, we're working underneath. And look at, I mean, especially if you're working with like a marker, it does not take you all that long. I'm going pretty fast here. Okay. All right. So as I wrap that up, that is a review in hatching, cross-hatching, and stippling, and some drawing techniques. And that is the end of my first video, guys. I hope this was helpful. And please email me or direct message me on Instagram if you would like specific techniques shown. Next up is going to be portrait setup. I was asked that by an intermediate student, so that will be our next video. Thank you for joining, guys. Good luck out there.